what is there to say about Breath of the Wild that hasn't already been said? In only 4 short years, the game has become the best-selling Zelda game of all time, not to mention the ridiculous amount of awards it won during 2017 and 2018. When the game first launched, it changed the entire outlook on what an open-world game could be. Everyone sang praises for its large world map and design. Reviewers called the game a masterpiece, a perfect game, and the ultimate Zelda experience. Yet that last title is quite far from the truth. Breath of the Wild doesn't feel like a Zelda game, mainly because the whole goal when developing the game was to break conventions and evolve the series. While it's still technically a Zelda game, it threw out a lot of the basic structure of its predecessors and tried something new. After Skyward Sword released, Nintendo knew that the series couldn't survive much longer with its linear design that all the previous games had. They had to adapt it to a more modern audience and what was popular at the time. They knew making Breath of the Wild an open-world game was incredibly risky due to the meteoric rise in popularity of open-world games and the genre as a whole. When the game first started development back in 2012, games like Skyrim, GTA V, and Fallout New Vegas were at the height of their popularity, and everyone wanted a piece of the pie when it came to open-world games' success. Throughout the game's development, many AAA open-world games came and went, mainly thanks to Ubisoft turning every single one of their IPs into an open-world game, and everyone thought that not much else could be done to innovate the genre. Nintendo probably realized this and decided to stick with it anyways, knowing that they would have to do something completely new so Breath of the Wild just didn't fade into obscurity with all the other open-world games of the time. In order to make sure they got it right, the game was delayed multiple times, to many people's dismay, including mine, and was finally released in 2017. The excitement was beyond anything anyone had ever seen before. It was the flagship launch title on the Switch and was many people's first game that they picked up when they bought the Switch. With its beautifully designed world and a sense of exploration that makes even Bethesda blush, the game was a roaring success and it pushed the genre forward into new possibilities. Many people, myself included, loved the game and played it for hundreds upon hundreds of hours. Now you may be wondering why I said all of that, despite many people still having all of this fresh in their minds since it was only a short 4 years ago. I mention all of that as context as to why so many people thought the game was perfect. As time went on, however, people began to recognize the game's flaws and criticize it accordingly. What was once perceived as perfect started to show its true colors. With time, it earned the title of being a flawed masterpiece by many reviewers, and myself. While being an evolution of the Zelda franchise, there are many important aspects of what made a Zelda game missing. The game had a lackluster story where you only saw events that caused Hyrule to collapse through memories scattered around the map. You as the player were unable to be an active part in the game's story, and while it was interesting, was not very engaging. The game also lacked traditional dungeons that the series is also known for. They were too short most of the time, and many of them were just reused defeat this one enemy to finish the shrine. The Divine Beasts were also good additions and presented an interesting idea of dungeons that the player could change and control, but were not good substitutions for traditional dungeons. They felt more like mini-dungeons, like the Gerudo Fortress and the Ice Cavern from Ocarina of Time. Many people were also upset about the weapon durability system and did not like having certain weapons break. That one is considered a flaw solely based on opinion due to many others liking the system and believing it to be a great addition. Also a more personal gripe that I know a few select others have as well, but why in the hell did they put 900 Korok seeds in the game? And I say this for a select few because a vast majority of players wouldn't even try to get all 900. I was one of those select fews, and it was absolutely not worth it. Yet despite all these flaws, many still love the game, myself included. Breath of the Wild is among the top 3 of my greatest games of all time lists, for many different reasons. I recognize the game isn't perfect and has tons of flaws that separate it from the series' origins more than I think Nintendo intended. Regardless of it barely feeling like a Zelda game to begin with, it's subjectively my favorite game in the series. I grew up playing Zelda games with my first being Twilight Princess on the Wii. I fell in love with the series and the stories the games told. I loved them so much that I set out on a mission to 100% complete every game in the series. And well, I did just that. I fully completed every game in the series, including the CDI games. Yes, I subjected myself to that torture, and I still did it. It was not fun. I was quite young when I finally finished them all, and I felt like I was burnt out with the series. I still loved all the games, except for the CDI ones, but I needed a break from the series to expand my horizons a little bit more. While the game was in development, I kept up with it for a little bit, but over time, after it got delayed over and over again, I kind of lost interest and kind of forgot that it was coming out altogether. When the game initially launched, I didn't even know it came out. I hadn't paid attention to the series for quite some time at that point, and it was about a year or so after the game that I finally got a chance to play it. I had watched the trailer that they showed at the reveal of the Nintendo Switch back in 2017, and my love for the series was once again reignited. Not too long after I watched the trailer, I literally went out and bought a Nintendo Wii U copy just to play it on my friend's Wii U for one night while I was over at his house. As soon as I started playing it, I just couldn't stop it or put it down. I ended up playing it through the night and not sleeping. I wasn't able to borrow the friend's Wii U to finish the game, so I did what any sane person would do. I went out and bought the game on the Switch, and started using one of the Switches that my university had for their esports programs to play it. I was there from the moment the facility opened to the minute it closed. Eventually I wanted to play it at home, and I just sucked it up and bought my own Switch. I had to start the game over for a third time, but I didn't care. I played the game for hours upon hours, even to the detriment of my grades in school. While I disregarded a lot of my personal obligations to play the game, I didn't really care because I was addicted to exploring Hyrule and uncovering all of its secrets. Eventually I got my act together and put the game down for a little bit. After finishing the game for the first time, I wanted to take a little bit of a break before I tried 100% completing the game. During my time away from the game, things in my personal life weren't going so well. I was failing some of my classes and disregarding my longtime girlfriend at the time. It wasn't solely because Breath of the Wild, there were other factors that played into it, like severe depression, but the game was my escape from reality and I just never wanted to leave it. Luckily, during this break, I was able to salvage my grades and repair some of my friendships, but the girlfriend and I decided to split up after almost 4 years of being together. When that happened, my depression took over, and in addition to other events, I hit absolute rock bottom. This all happened right at the end of the semester, so I pretty much just worked and played Breath of the Wild for 2 months straight. 100%ing the game gave me a goal to look forward to achieving when I was at my lowest, and it helped me through this time. After I finished my first 100% run, I felt accomplished that I had finished such a monumental task, and I had a renewed sense of motivation. Since then, I've gotten much better and took some time off school to focus on myself for a while and eventually reconnected with the girlfriend that I split up with right before I hit rock bottom. Thankfully, we've been back together for almost a year now, and it's never been better. During this time, I did 2 more 100% runs of the game, with one of them being on Master Mode. I also learned how to speedrun the game and do quite a few other glitches. I also met this little fellow along the way as well. According to my Switch counter, I have over 1,000 hours logged into the game, so to say I enjoyed it was a bit of an understatement. I mentioned all of these personal things that happened while I was playing the game to illustrate how important the game was to me. While I regret all of the negative things that happened was getting a sequel, just like everybody else. I was also very excited that I was going to be able to experience another story in this iteration of Hyrule. Then Nintendo pulled a From Software and has been quiet about the game for almost 2 years. It's seriously almost to the level of Souls fans when it comes to any news about Elden Ring. Please, Miyazaki, just give us something about the game because we're all going hollow waiting for it. Despite not getting the sequel yet, Nintendo made another incredibly smart choice to release a new Hyrule Warriors game set in the Breath of the Wild universe. Finally, we were given a new story to experience in this world. Although, not many people really knew what the story would be, seeing as we already knew what happened during the war 100 years prior to Breath of the Wild, well, the game ended up being sort of a prequel/sequel hybrid. The story of Age of Calamity was most likely meant to be a setup for the story of the sequel. So today, I'll be going through the story of Age of Calamity since many Zelda fans might not enjoy the Warriors game format and skip over it. Afterwards, I'll be sharing my thoughts and ideas about the insane potential that Breath of the Wild 2 has after taking Age of Calamity's story into account. So, if you have any intentions on playing Age of Calamity yourself, this is your spoiler warning, as I'll be covering all 7 chapters of the game in detail. Please go play this game before watching further if you have any intention of playing this game. It's absolutely fantastic, and while not a normal Zelda game, the story is absolutely worth at least one playthrough. So now that overly long introduction is over, let's get started with the actual purpose of this video, shall we? The game opens up with a scene from Breath of the Wild where Calamity Ganon has been revived and destroying all of Hyrule. Zelda just unlocks her sealing powers while saving Link from death. At that moment, a tiny guardian stashed away in Hyrule Castle awakens and decides to travel back in time before Calamity Ganon was revived to warn them. So going forward, I will be referring to the 2 different timelines as Breath of the Wild timeline and the Age of Calamity timeline. The game then cuts to the first mission where Hyrule Castle is under attack by a large group of monsters. King Rome orders the soldiers to go and fight the monsters, with Link being among them. During the mission, Link stumbles onto the little guardian. He also runs into Impa, who is being chased by a group of bokoblins. She's carrying a Sheikah slate, which awakens the little guardian since he was knocked out from the whole time-traveling thing. After Link rescues Impa, the two are trying to understand what the little guardian is, but it sees Hyrule Castle off in the distance and rushes over to it. Link and Impa chase after the little guardian all the way back to the castle. There, they meet up with Zelda, who is happy to see them return safely. The little guardian attempts to tell Zelda what he's doing there, but seeing as he's basically R2-D2, he's not really successful. So in order to try to understand the little guardian, they take it to the ancient lab where Pura and Robbie can analyze it. Upon further inspection, they find out exactly why the little guardian's there. He's trying to warn them about the Calamity. Here we begin Chapter 2. The beginning of Chapter 2 starts when Zelda, Link, and Impa go around recruiting the champions to pilot the Divine Beasts. Their first stop takes them to Zora's domain, where Zelda asks if Mipha can pilot the Divine Beast. King Dorephan denies the request, saying it's too dangerous for her to pilot. Suddenly, they are informed that a monster army is approaching the domain and that Baby Sidon is missing. Link and Mipha set out to search for Baby Sidon and eventually come across him trying to fight a Lionel all by himself. After rescuing him from the Lionel, Mipha finds out that a larger force of monsters is closing in on the domain. Mipha then decides to pilot Vah Ruta in order to save her home. You then have a mission where you get to control a Divine Beast. After the monsters are defeated, Zelda and Link waste no time heading to Death Mountain to recruit Daruk. When they get there, Daruk immediately agrees to be its pilot, but mentions there's a slight problem with getting to Vah Rudania. The path is blocked by hordes of monsters. They then set off to fight their way up the mountain to get to the Divine Beast. After fighting their way up the mountain, they reach Vah Rudania, which just happens to be in the middle of an active volcano. Just a random side note here. I'm not sure if this was an oversight, but both Link and Zelda aren't wearing any sort of protective gear from the heat, and they're standing at the edge of a volcano. In Breath of the Wild, if Link dared go anywhere near the summit of the volcano without any sort of fire protection, he'd just catch on fire immediately. Just a small nitpick, but still something I noticed. Daruk then enters Vah Rudania and uses it to wipe out the remaining monster forces in yet another Divine Beast mission. These missions are really cool because they show off the true power of the Divine Beasts, since you get to use them in combat. In Breath of the Wild, I always wondered exactly what made them so strong. Like, they say over and over again that they're strong enough to take down Calamity Ganon, but after you free them from the Light Ganons, they just kind of sit there until the final boss fight, and even then, Link does most of the work. Now, after playing these missions, I understand why they're so strong, since you can just effortlessly take out thousands of enemies. Anyways, after they recruit Daruk, they head to Rito Village to try and recruit Revali. Once again, another side note, you can actually recruit any of the champions in any order that you choose. This is just the order that I chose to recruit them in my playthrough. Once arriving in the Hebrew region, a strong snowstorm causes Zelda to stay behind while Link went to scout ahead. Due to the presence of the little guardian, Revali felt threatened by Link and decides to send the Rito soldiers after him. Despite Revali already being kind of a dick and hostile to Link to begin with, the reason for this extra hostility will become more clear in a little bit. Once Link makes his way to Revali, the two engage in a serious battle where the two trade blows back and forth. Eventually, Zelda finally makes her way up there and stops the two from fighting any longer. Once everyone's calmed down, Revali explains to them that there's another little guardian that terrorized the city beforehand. The other little guardian is one that is being controlled by the dark forces and the main antagonist in the game. We'll get to him later. Revali agrees to Zelda's request to be the Divine Beast Vah Meadows pilot, and then the group leaves to head toward Gerudo City. Upon arriving in Gerudo Desert, Link, Zelda, and Impa are attacked by the Gerudo women for seemingly no reason. This forces the two to fight their way into Gerudo City and to the throne room where Urbosa is. When they reach the throne room, Urbosa threatens Zelda and attempts to kill her, but gets hit by Pikachu's Thunderbolt right as she gets close to her. This lightning strike comes from the real Urbosa as she enters the room because, as it turns out, the Urbosa that tried to attack Zelda was in fact Master Koga of the Yiga clan. If you've played Breath of the Wild before, you know and probably love Master Koga as a character. He isn't in the game for very long, but his boss fight is probably one of the most memorable from the game. For those who haven't played Breath of the Wild, and you're just watching this video because you were randomly recommended this video thanks to the YouTube algorithm, Master Koga is basically Patrick Star mixed with Doodlebob. He likes to think he's the master villain who will one day rule the world, but in reality he's just a goofy buffoon with a beer belly. Anyways, after being exposed by Urbosa, Master Koga and his lackeys flee back to their hideout. Urbosa suggests that they track down the Yiga clan and defeat them once and for all so they don't interfere with preparations for the Calamity again. They go and do just that, but when all seems lost for Koga, his top henchman named Suga shows up and saves him. After they return from the Yiga clan hideout, Urbosa agrees to pilot the divine beast Va Naboris and does so in order to fend off the remaining monsters in the desert. After the mission with Va Naboris, the main villain is introduced and goes by the name Aster. He's working with the Yiga clan in order to bring about the Calamity. He claims to be chosen by the Calamity itself and is also the owner of the other little guardian. I'm just going to say a little bit here about Aster because I absolutely love his character. When it comes to a Zelda game antagonist, Calamity Ganon is cool as a concept, but is elevated even more with the addition of Aster. He's a crazy sorcerer who gets even crazier as time goes on, and shows that he will stop at nothing to fulfill his goal, no matter the cost. He reminds me a lot of a more modern version of Vati from the Four Swords game and the Minish Cap. Once they return to Hyrule Castle, the Yiga clan attempt to assassinate Zelda and attack the Hyrule Castle town. This ends up being more of a roadblock than anything since Zelda never really ends up in any true danger. Link and the champions make quick work of the Yiga clan and protect the people of the town. King Rome then orders them to travel to the Korok Forest in order to seek out the Master Sword, as well as to possibly find the knight who is able to wield it. Obviously, we already know who this knight is, but it just confused me a little bit when they were to go to seek out the sword first before finding the worthy candidate, since they already knew where the sword was. Oh well, I guess. They set off towards the Korok Forest and find that it is being swarmed by monsters and the Yiga clan. How convenient. Chapter 3 then begins with a mission where you pilot Divine Beast Va Meadow to significantly weaken the monster's forces so that the group can proceed towards the Lost Woods. After making quick work of the monsters, Zelda, Link, Impa, and all the champions move through the Korok Forest. Along the way, they notice a very large Korok with maracas of all things. This is Hestu. I am not a fan of Hestu. Hestu thinks it's okay to reward you with a golden piece of shit for finding 100 Korok seeds. Can you tell that I'm a little salty about the reward for that? I do like the voice acting for the character in this game, though. Hestu agrees to lead them through the Lost Woods, so long as they protect him and help him defeat the remaining monsters. After making their way through the Lost Woods, Zelda and Link find themselves trapped by Aster, who has summoned the Blight versions of the four champions. Link does his best to fight them off, but can't hold them off for very long. His sword breaks in half, leaving him defenseless, and Aster turns his attention towards Zelda. As Aster is about to kill Zelda, the Master Sword turns on, glows, and causes the Blight champions to disappear. Link then goes and pulls the sword from the pedestal, and successfully holds off Aster and forces him to retreat. Now with the knight who can wield the Master Sword and all four of the champions recruited, Zelda holds an inaugural ceremony appointing them as official protectors of Hyrule. There's also a scene where the little guardian and Impa get into a fight, and it's quite funny, but this ends Chapter 3. Chapter 4 begins with King Rome confronting Zelda about her training and her inability to awaken her powers. Zelda expresses to him that she's doing everything she can, but Rome scolds her for doing research into ancient technology rather than spending more time trying to awaken her powers. Wow, that's harsh. After this happens, they depart for the central tower to activate it along with all the other Sheikah towers in Hyrule. Once activated, they were able to find where the remaining Yiga clan is hiding, and go to once again try to put a stop to them. Well, to make a long story short, both Suga and Koga escape again, and once again are confronted by Aster. Both Suga and Koga are very upset with Aster as they failed to help them when they really needed his help. At the same time, Pyrrha and Robbie are doing more analysis on the little guardian and come to find out the Calamity will be revived on Zelda's 17th birthday. Once they find this out, King Rome orders Zelda to travel to the Spring of Courage in an attempt to speed up the process of unlocking her powers. While at the Spring of Courage, a horde of monsters attacks them and interrupts Zelda's training. After fighting their way out and Zelda using her knowledge of ancient technology to save them, Impa gives Zelda some tough love by forcing her to take a compliment instead of being insecure. This inspires Zelda and motivates her to continue to try and awaken her powers. Chapter 4 was honestly quite short, but it was more used as a setup chapter for the second half of the game, so I guess that's okay. Chapter 5 starts with a scene where Pyrrha and Robbie are once again doing more research with the little guardian and the Sheikah Slate. While doing said research, they find some information about the Calamity, but before we're shown what they found, a bunch of Yiga clan imposters trap them in the lab. During this confusion, Pyrrha gives the Sheikah Slate to the little guardian and he runs off towards Zelda. Right as the little guardian reaches Zelda, Calamity Ganon is revived and all hell breaks loose. During their escape, King Rome and a few soldiers get surrounded by a bunch of guardians, and in a dramatic scene where Link and Zelda are running away, King Rome supposedly gets blasted into oblivion. I wonder if he ended up part of the same chess club that Todd Howard was. If you get that reference, then you should probably go outside. After their escape, Zelda and Link make their way towards the eastern side of Hyrule to go and assist the Zoras and Gorons. While they are traveling towards those regions, we see scenes from where the champions are fighting the Blight Ganons. As you probably guessed it, more time-traveling shenanigans occur. Right as Mipha and Daruk are about to get killed by the Blight Ganons, both Sidon and Yunobo from the Breath of the Wild timeline appear to aid them in the fight, thus saving their lives and changing their fates. After a couple missions where you fend off the two Blight Ganons and save the eastern side of Hyrule, the group make their way to the western regions of Hyrule in order to attempt to save Rivali and Urbosa. Again, you can probably guess what happens. Both Teba and Riju from the Breath of the Wild timelines show up and save the two champions from the Blight Ganons. Once all of the champions have been rescued, we cut to Aster confronting Koga and Suga and essentially giving a few Yika clan soldiers the bad suck and takes their life force and puts it into the little guardian. Due to this event, Koga realizes that there's only one way to beat Aster, and it is by joining the other side to fight alongside Link and Zelda. Chapter 6 is also a short chapter per se. This one's more of a setup for the long last chapter of the game. But anyways, Chapter 6 begins with Akala Citadel being absolutely obliterated with guardians and monsters. Somehow Robbie escaped Hyrule Castle during all of the chaos and ended up at the Citadel. He speaks with a random soldier where they discuss their inevitable fate. However, Robbie is a little bit more optimistic that they will be saved. Well, Robbie was right, and Mipha and Sidon show up to aid them with the power of Vabruta. Eventually, they fight their way to rescue Robbie, and he tells them that Pyrrha also escaped and is at Hateno Fort. The group then make their way towards Hateno Fort in order to rescue Pyrrha as well. Upon seeing the mass destruction going on, Urbosa and Riju pilot Von Boris over to the fort and destroy dozens of guardians in an attempt to aid the defending soldiers. During this fight, Aster shows up and attempts to end Link and Zelda once and for all by sending all 4 Blight Ganons after them at once. As Link starts to lose the battle against them, Zelda runs over to Link and in a moment of desperation awakens her power and greatly weakens the Blight Ganons. Eventually, both Link and Zelda push Aster back and save Hateno Fort. Like I said, the Chapter 6 was quite short, but again, Chapter 7 is quite long, so I guess that really makes up for the short time length. I will also note that there's a lot of side missions that appear and happen throughout all of these chapters, so the shorter chapters tend to have a lot more of like the side content associated with those chapters, so technically speaking, if you do interact with a lot of the side content, those chapters aren't as short either. For the purpose of this video, I won't be really mentioning any of the side content because there really isn't any like story development content that happens. It's mainly just like specific missions for certain characters and general bite-sized missions that are mainly used to give the player more resources and rupees to be able to spend at like the blacksmith to fuse weapons, as well as the training grounds to help level up characters that might be a little bit lacking and behind in level. There's also a couple merchants that are spread around the world that you can unlock. They do give out useful resources sometimes, but for the most part, a lot of the bigger upgrades that you can get throughout the world are tied to more like mission-oriented items. I probably should have mentioned that a little bit earlier in the video, but I guess now's better than ever. Going back to the story, the final chapter of the game starts off right after Zelda awakens her powers. She gives a speech to all of the soldiers, boosting their morale and instructing them to make their way towards the Great Plateau, where other soldiers are fighting to defend the village there. When they arrive at the Great Plateau, it is revealed that King Rome beat Mr. Todd Howard at a chess game and earned another shot at life. Man, this script really went down the shitter, didn't it? Anyways, Zelda and King Rome reunite and combine their forces to save the Great Plateau village. After a bit of rest, everyone gathers on Hyrule Field as they are about to push for the final attack on Hyrule Castle. With the combined powers of all the different races and the Divine Beast, Link, Zelda, and the champions make their way up to Hyrule Castle and run into Aster for the last time. He tries to command the Bad Guardian, which at this point has evolved into its second form evolution, but instead of listening to his order, Aster is the one that gets the bad suck this time and gets absorbed into the Bad Guardian. In doing this, the little good Guardian, who we find out who was named Teriko by Zelda when she was young, is forced to attack Link and Zelda. Link has no choice but to fight Teriko and destroy it. Man, I just have to say, this is probably one of the hardest boss fights for me mentally, just because I love Teriko. He's such a cute little character that they added into this game that just added so much like comedic effect and so much just character. Like, all of the other Guardians and ancient technology that we see in the game just has absolutely no personality whatsoever. But Terrako, that is not the case. That little guy has so much personality that it just oozes with charm. Whoever at Koei Tecmo or Ninja Theory decided to write Terrako into the story and did all of this writing, give that man or woman a raise. My god, they did a fantastic job. A+. Well, regardless of if we want to or not, Link has to defeat Terrako, and after doing this, Zelda is absolutely devastated and is overcome with rage. She orders everyone to charge in after the bad guardian, and once they reach the throne room, they come to find out that the bad guardian has evolved to its final form and has been taken over by the spirit of Calamity Ganon. The design of Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild was really cool, but the design of Calamity Ganon in this game, well, that man is an absolute unit, like literally. For the first stage of the boss fight, you literally cannot damage him. He has some sort of protective shield on him that basically allows him to just not feel pain. When I first played this boss fight, I thought to myself, oh shit, how am I going to do this? There's no way for me to damage him. I've tried using all the characters and even, the powered up Master Sword, but nope, just can't do a damn thing to him. Well, turns out that you're actually not supposed to be able to damage him. I didn't know this at first, so I had restarted the boss fight multiple times, which is because I have the IQ of a literal squirrel. Anyways, after fighting Calamity Ganon for a little while, there's a scene where Terrako, after being all destroyed and kind of left to just rot, musters up a tiny little bit of energy. I didn't know that he could, just come back from the dead. I'm not gonna lie, at this exact moment, I thought that he was gonna revive and just go Super Saiyan and we'd have a Godzilla versus Kong fight on our hands, but no, unfortunately that is not what happens. Instead, Terrako initiates a self-destruction sequence where then he literally just beelines it straight towards Calamity Ganon and then just sacrifices himself, even though I thought he was already dead. Dang it, Nintendo. First you make us kill him, then you get our hopes up, and then go and kill him again. What the hell? Trying to play with our feelings here? Ugh. Well, after there's only one tiny little piece left of Terrako, Calamity Ganon can finally be hurt. Thank God. I also forgot to mention that, when Terrako kind of just kamikazed himself into Calamity Ganon, he kind of also made the entire floor collapse, and then everyone just kind of falls into the laboratory where Link fought Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild, so that's cool. One other thing that I want to mention that I just kind of have a little bit of a question about is, so the laboratory is supposed to be super far underground, but yet everyone just kind of lands safely and then somehow gets back out, and there's no real explanation as to how that happens. Even in the boss fight in Breath of the Wild and Age of Calamity, there's no real door that I noticed, so I don't know what's going on there. If they're just, having Rivali flap his way up to hold everybody, but even then, I don't think he could, lift Daruk, because Daruk is kind of thick. Oh well, that's just a small detail that, is again, not explained, but also not very important to the plot. I just noticed these things because, again, I paid too much attention to the tiny little details that do not matter. But anyways, after Link deals the final blow with the Master Sword, Zelda uses her powers to seal Calamity Ganon away, and the game ends with a scene where all of the time travelers are sent back to their timeline, and all of Hyrule has been saved. Once again, whoever wrote this story deserves an absolute massive raise. They did a fantastic job with all the characters, handling the story, and just the pacing of it. Everything was just done super well. I do think it's just a shame, though, that not many people will be able to experience this story to the fullest extent because, again, it is stuck behind a Warriors-style gameplay, and I know quite a few Zelda fans that aren't that big of a fan of that sort of style game. So unfortunately, they're just going to miss out on one of the most compelling Zelda stories in any of the games. Obviously, the Hyrule Warriors formula suits this type of game extremely well. The plot is only helped by the fact that it's a Hyrule Warriors game and it's in that sort of style where you're defeating hordes upon hordes of enemies. It just works. I don't know if you can tell, but I have been playing quite a few Bethesda games recently, which is why there's all those random references to some of the things that they've done in the past. I promise, there's a reason behind all of that. Just trust me, you'll see down the line, you'll see what I'm talking about. Man, what a subtle way to announce a video that I'm working on. Well. Okay, back on topic. About after 15 pages now, it's finally time to talk about what this video is actually about. It's time to talk about the exciting potential of the sequel of Breath of the Wild, and how Age of Calamity plays into it. With both the story of Breath of the Wild and Age of Calamity in mind, Breath of the Wild 2 has a whole lot to work with and could go in so many different directions. Even with Age of Calamity's story, the teaser trailer Nintendo released for the sequel still doesn't quite make sense. There wasn't anything in the story that really gave a hint as to what Link and Zelda were doing down in those ruins, or exactly where they were, or even who that mysterious character was that we saw. Obviously, the teaser trailer has been analyzed to hell and back since it's been out for 2 years, and everyone has pretty much concluded that in the teaser trailer, that mysterious person is a new reincarnation of Ganondorf. Now, we can't be 100% certain that this is really Ganondorf since Nintendo hasn't really given us any new information about the sequel in almost 2 years, but thankfully, we should be getting some news about it later this year. And thank God we are. I am tired of waiting. I know they're just taking the time they need to make sure that the game is as good as possible, and the fact that COVID has probably, affected development on this. I just wish I had a little bit of Terrico's power so I could just jump forward into the future so I could already be playing the game. Listen, I know it sounds desperate, but seriously, just think about it. Just think about it. Anyways, now time to explain why I think Breath of the Wild 2 has the potential to be one of the greatest games ever created. Good lord, it took me 31 minutes to get the actual purpose of this video. Oh man. So when I say potential, it's really dependent on how much of the feedback Nintendo takes from Breath of the Wild and implements changes into the sequel. With the existence of Age of Calamity, it already seems like they've taken feedback about the lacking story of the first game, and also during the teaser trailer of the second game, they show a lot of creepy shit that gives a lot of people Majora's Mask vibes, and I am absolutely all for that. Now, the thing that I'm most curious about is which timeline the sequel will take place in. Will it take place in Breath of the Wild timeline or the Age of Calamity timeline? Personally, my guess is that they will go with the Age of Calamity timeline. With all the time travel going on, it's hard to say how Nintendo will handle the different timelines and which interpretation of time travel they will use when it comes to explaining how everything goes down. Is there like a huge Zelda multiverse that's going to be in play here? The first Hyrule Warriors definitely hints at that. Or is there a single timeline where what the time travelers do in the past affects their present? If you don't quite understand what I'm getting at, it's okay. The whole concept of time travel is quite confusing, and there are many different interpretations to how it works. That is also the reason why we have not figured out how to time travel just yet. Avengers Endgame definitely proved that understanding the concept of time travel is quite hard for many people. I still don't quite understand everything about that type of time travel that they introduced in the movie, but I'm just going to pretend like I do so I sound smart. I'm not even going to try to explain how it works or how I think it works. There's other people all over the place on YouTube that are probably much better at explaining it than I am. So if you're really that curious as to how, it all works, I would definitely recommend going on YouTube and trying to find someone who's much better at explaining it than I am. But regardless of which timeline they choose to go with in the sequel, there's going to be a lot of interesting things that they're going to have to explain and how it all works out. But thankfully, with the inclusion of Age of Calamity, Nintendo has actually given themselves a lot of breathing room with, leeway in how to explain everything. If they go down the Age of Calamity route, they pretty much wrapped up that story all nice and neatly, so if they wanted to tell another story in that same world, they would have the absolute freedom to do that. But if they decide to go back to the Breath of the Wild timeline, then they'd have the absolute freedom to just say, everything that Sidon, Teba, Riju, and Yunobo did in the Age of Calamity timeline affected what happened in their present, so it could end up being completely different than what we saw in Breath of the Wild. The possibilities here are basically endless. Now, when it comes to other aspects of the game that Nintendo needs to improve on, I have high hopes that they will listen to the criticism and implement the changes needed. In the teaser trailer, there are many different locations shown that look as if they could be hints at going back to traditional dungeons. There's also no sign of any Sheikah Towers or shrines in the teaser trailer, which is still something that confuses me. But unless they go with the interpretation of there's only one timeline and the events of Breath of the Wild were changed because of Age of Calamity, I don't really have any ideas as to what could have happened to them. While they could have been edited out of the trailer for spoiler purposes, that means that there has to be a reason behind their disappearance. Maybe Pura and Robbie could have sent them back into the ground since there would be no need for them anymore after the Calamity was defeated, and while that could be a possibility, it's quite unlikely. In Age of Calamity, both Pura and Robbie were very adamant about using their mysterious power for convenience purposes, mainly for their teleportation function. Or alternatively, since there was no looming presence of the Calamity, they automatically went back into the ground themselves. This could be explained by the fact that those giant pillars that appear around Hyrule Castle that release guardians emerged from the ground right as the Calamity struck. However, you'd think if they went back in the ground, they would have left a large crater where they were, but I guess we'll just have to wait to truly know what happened to them. Okay, enough rambling. It's now time to focus a little bit more on the sequel and its potential. As I stated much earlier in the video, Nintendo knocked the feeling of exploration in Breath of the Wild absolutely out of the park. They have that aspect of the world nailed down, and all they really have to do is make a couple of changes here and there to change up the map a bit so they can instill that sense of exploration all over again. I don't think they'll be able to truly replicate that feeling of exploration since we've already, had a game in this world. But again, there's so much that they could change up to possibly even come close to that sense of exploration. For example, they could say after the Calamity was over and Hyrule was being rebuilt, many new temples and dungeons were discovered. Maybe they were mining ore for building materials on Death Mountain, but as they were mining, they found a hidden entrance to a Zonai ruin hidden deep within the mountain. I know I haven't mentioned the Zonai tribe until now, but with all the breadcrumbs they left in the first game about them, it would be super easy for Nintendo to include them as a large part and playing factor in the story of the sequel. I won't even dare try to delve into all of the lore and very specific details about the Zonai tribe simply because there's already so many people that have done that the past 4 years, and it's almost inevitable that, again, they will once be present in the sequel, albeit with probably much more of a prominent role. And what's even crazier about them is the fact that not very many people know of their existence. Their existence was actually pretty well hidden in the game. In the story of Breath of the Wild, though, they're all dead. They died like thousands of years ago, and that's why all of those random ruins are there. How they died and how they went extinct is, again, not known very well. Nintendo never really put any details as to what happened to them in the game. The basic gist of all the details of the Zonai tribe that are in the game is the fact that they existed and that they were the ones who did all of the ancient-looking temples and stuff. But what's most important about them is the fact that they do exist, and there is the possibility for a very interesting story to be told about them. Another piece of evidence that suggests that they probably have a larger role in the sequel is the fact that the ruins that Link and Zelda are seen traveling through in the teaser trailer have a very similar building style to that of the Zonai ruins hidden around the map. Could it be a coincidence that they have a similar building structure to the Zonai? Maybe. But do I think so? No, not really. Nintendo left all the information about the Zonai very obscure for a reason, and I believe that this was the reason why they left it so obscure, is so that they could use it to explain a lot of the events that go on in the sequel. Obviously, it's been said that Breath of the Wild 2 kind of started out as an extra DLC pack, so I don't think it was fully intended that they would be discussed and have such a prominent role in the sequel, but nonetheless, that seems to be where Nintendo is going and taking the direction of the story. So with all that in mind, there's quite a lot of potential that the Zonai can have to affect the sequel. Once again, this is mostly speculation, and the Zonai could absolutely have nothing to do with the story of the sequel, but to me it just makes too much sense for them to be a large role in the sequel when it comes to implementing certain changes that need to be made for the gameplay format. When it comes to world design, there's also quite a lot of doors that have been opened, not only from Age of Calamity, but from the teaser trailer for the sequel as well. In terms of the effect Age of Calamity could have on the world is in fact that Hyrule won't be mostly a desolate place filled with broken buildings and ruins. Many of the buildings and settlements that were destroyed in Breath of the Wild were able to survive in Age of Calamity due to Ganon being stopped and sealed much, much earlier than in Breath of the Wild. If Nintendo chooses to include these settlements as explorable locations in the sequel, there will be more life breathed into the setting, both literally and figuratively. It would add to the exploration factor as players would be able to see the towns in their full glory, and while they were shown off in Age of Calamity in a few levels, they seemed to be more generic towns that were used as a setting for the missions. You weren't really able to interact with any of the villagers living there or really experiencing the culture of those villages. Obviously, there are Hylian settlements scattered around Hyrule that actually survived in Breath of the Wild, but those were more like rural towns and farm towns, which, again, you can really only do so much with in terms of a culture. But with Hyrule Castle Town, there can be so much done with it. It could be a hub for all of the different races to gather and live in harmony in one little settlement. So all of the different cultures that we see scattered in throughout Hyrule are all centered in one specific place. And seeing how all those different cultures meld together could also be very, very interesting in terms of setting and overall dynamic. Honestly, now that I think about it more, it's kind of strange that we haven't seen a village in any of the Zelda games that combines all of the different races living in one area together. It seems like such an interesting concept that Nintendo just hasn't capitalized on yet. They could do so much with that sort of city. And seeing there's no real feud between any of the different races in Breath of the Wild, Nintendo has a huge opportunity to make something really cool out of Hyrule Castle Town. Now, I could be wrong and just not remembering any sort of town that included all the different races of the Zelda universe into it, but at least right now, to my knowledge, I can't remember any. Another thing to mention from the teaser trailer is the fact that Hyrule Castle basically pulls a skyloft and starts floating up into the air. There are so many possibilities with this fact. Maybe a whole underground ancient city could be discovered underneath Hyrule Castle. Maybe Nintendo will pull a fast one on us and have Hyrule Castle be teleported to a new location that isn't Hyrule that we will be able to explore. I highly doubt that second suggestion will happen, as it would be weird if they just kind of disregarded all the work they did on the version of Hyrule from Breath of the Wild. I'm personally leaning more towards there being an underground city hidden underneath the castle, because the teaser trailer shows off Link and Zelda exploring what seems to be ancient ruins, the ones that I talked about previously. There's a lot of potential when it comes to the design of Hyrule in the sequel, as there are so many ways that they could explain massive changes to the world with absolute ease. Now, when it comes to the whole weapon durability system implemented in the first game, I have a feeling that won't be going anywhere. I'm a bit worried as to how they're going to explain a huge reset for Link, since the sequel is the exact same Link from Breath of the Wild or Age of Calamity, where he's at his peak of his strength. They really can't pull a Majora's Mask type reset since Link is still shown to have the Master Sword in the teaser trailer. Maybe they could have Link place the Master Sword back into the pedestal since there's really no need for it. And if that's the case, he could have always gone back to get the sword for their journey into the ancient ruins where they find the corpse of Ganondorf. That would mean that they knew an evil presence down there to begin with, which again could help explain a soft reset for Link. The first part of the game could take place exploring some of the new ruins that were discovered during the rebuilding of Hyrule, and once the castle starts floating into the air, you can go back to the Korok Forest and get it once more. Just a second ago, I mentioned another aspect that is a little bit concerning in how they would explain, and that is how would they reset Link and all the strength that he acquired from completing the shrines. I suppose in the Age of Calamity timeline, he never really did any of the shrines because there was no need for them, but still, Link in Age of Calamity is shown to have just about, if not more strength than what he did in Breath of the Wild. Someone's endurance isn't something you can just hard reset in a character, unless there's a very good reason for it. While the Shrine of Resurrection was a bit of a cheap way to explain that sort of thing, it is an exception because it makes sense with the story. Also, there was that fact that Link was kind of knocked the fuck out for 100 years, and that could kind of make someone lose all their strength. I don't know, I haven't been knocked out for 100 years, so I don't know. Now, I know that the shrines in Breath of the Wild were more implemented for gameplay purposes and used as a way to increase Link's hearts and stamina, but technically, Link wouldn't be able to wield the Master Sword if all that strength was taken away. Part of the reason Link can't go back to the Lost Woods to get the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild right after he wakes up is because he lacks the strength needed to wield it after being asleep for 100 years. Yes, I know he could have also forgotten where it was since he lost his memory, but even if you find it in the game before you have the required amount of hearts, you still won't be able to take the sword from the pedestal. Speaking about the Breath of the Wild timeline again for a minute, if all the Sheikah Towers and shrines were turned underground, it would be incredibly cheap if they used that as an excuse for why Link's strength is reset. If the Spirit Orbs only gave Link temporary strength and went away after the Calamity was defeated, it would also be quite cheap. Another option that I think is probably the most likely to happen is that they just hard reset Link's hearts and stamina for gameplay purposes and just not explain it in the game. While it's kind of lame that they go with that, it would probably be the easiest way to go about it. I genuinely don't think that they let you have the Master Sword right off the bat in the sequel, because finding the Master Sword is a huge core moment in the game. It's always a huge jump for power in Link, and it usually helps push the story forward. However, I do realize that these are technically uncharted waters for storytelling in Legend of Zelda, because in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, you are technically playing as the same Link. However, due to the time travel mechanic of pulling out the Master Sword and the fact that Link isn't even in Hyrule in Majora's Mask to begin with, that reset was a little bit more understandable. So unless they go with the idea that I proposed earlier, where Hyrule Castle just kind of ups and goes to a whole different region for Link and Zelda to explore, I don't think that it's going to be very easy for Nintendo to explain such a large drop in power for Link. Okay, so after thinking this over and after writing the script, I do realize that there was something in the teaser trailer that could have some sort of reason as to why Link was reset. There was that one scene where Link's hand just kind of gets possessed by the green hand that was holding Ganondorf's corpse into place. So that might do something to Link and have something to do with his reset in power. And now that I think about it even more, I could totally see Nintendo letting you have the Master Sword for like a little bit in the beginning of the game and then taking it away once Link gets possessed by whatever that green hand thing is. And even from a design point of view too, that could make a lot of sense. Returning players who played Breath of the Wild would have a chance to refamiliarize themselves with the mechanics of the game. And then newer players who actually didn't play Breath of the Wild, which would be really weird, but is bound to happen, would give them a chance to see how strong Link actually is and give them sort of something to look forward to later on in the game. Now they could pull a whole Witcher series, and if you have a save file on your Switch from Breath of the Wild, you could just import your save file into the Breath of the Wild sequel. They could also add more horizontal progression elements into the game to make it so players who do import save files aren't super overpowered right at the beginning of the game. Do I think Nintendo would do this? No, not really. They've never really done anything like that in the past, so I don't know why they would start now. It would be kind of a weird game for them to start doing that with, but thinking about that concept is pretty fun and cool. Watch like all of this discussion that I'm doing be absolutely completely wrong, and I say nothing that was correct in the game, and I'm just sitting here like an absolute buffoon. I mean, I'm already a buffoon, but depending on how much I get wrong in this video, I could look like an even bigger buffoon who doesn't know what he's talking about. Regardless of if I've said anything correct or not in the past like 5 minutes, I still think Nintendo will do a good job with resetting Link and making it so it's a bit of a smooth transition from the first game to the sequel. I do not envy that person's job who has to come up with that idea. One final thing that Nintendo really needs to prioritize in the sequel is side quests. The side quests, all apart from like 2 in Breath of the Wild, are trash. Most of them are just simple fetch quests where you have to find a certain item for a certain NPC, or they're quests that lead you to some treasure. The quests where you have to go take pictures of the Leviathan skeletons and building Tarrytown were probably the best side quests in the game by a mile. The Leviathan one, despite it being a simple quest in concept, was great because it forced you to interact with a mysterious element of the game that had almost no explanation as to what those creatures were. It really got the player thinking about what those creatures could have been and why they existed so long ago and what happened to them. Tarrytown was just awesome because you helped build an entire town. The quest was engaging because the player was an active part in the town's creation. What those 2 quests had that not even the main story of the game had was the inclusion of player agency in the story. When you're telling a story in a video game, you really need to take advantage of the fact that video games are interactive mediums. Part of the reason that we play video games, and single-player games for that fact, is the stories and the fact that we can have a large role to play in those stories and how they unfold. Just look at series like The Witcher or Mass Effect. While both those game series have their flaws, one thing that they both do very well is giving the player agency over the story. Those games' entire narrative is based around a lot of the decisions you make. Now, obviously, those are 2 completely different type of games from Breath of the Wild. They also have a very large focus on RPG elements, and Breath of the Wild does not. But still, the concepts that those 2 game series stories implement could be used in Breath of the Wild and its sequel. To be fair though, a lot of the side quests within the Zelda series have been pretty simple fetch quests. But what those fetch quests did differently was that they had a smaller story attached to them. Most of the side quests in Breath of the Wild had little to no story attached to them. Going back to the Tarrytown side quest, what made it so engaging is the fact that you built an entire community. You also helped someone find their true love and actually impacted their life. If you didn't go out and find all those materials, that man would have never found his wife, many people would never have had their homes, and all thanks to you, you're the one that gave them all of that. If in the sequel we could just have maybe 10 to 20 side quests that are just as, if not more engaging than that quest, I think everyone will be happy. Instead of spending so much time on the quantity of the quests, spend more time on the quality of the quests. It has been proven time and time again that people prefer quality over quantity, and I really hope Nintendo takes that feedback and implements it into the sequel. They've been given such a large opportunity with the destruction of Hyrule in both games. There are so many quests where you could go around and help people rebuild their cities, rebuild their homes, take care of unique problems that they have. All Nintendo needs to do is just lean into the opportunities they've given themselves and take them. Thankfully, given the evidence that we've seen so far from the sequel, and all we've seen about it, I have high hopes that they are taking the feedback to heart and listening to their community. Once again, Nintendo has given themselves many opportunities to help improve upon all of the things that were lacking within Breath of the Wild. For the past 4 years, people have analyzed Breath of the Wild to hell and back. All of its flaws have been exposed, and many people have given plenty of good suggestions, including myself now, on how to fix all the issues that the game had. Nintendo doesn't even have to go with a lot of the suggestions that we make or implement all the side quests that we suggest. All they need to do is just listen to the feedback they've been given. While the sequel to Breath of the Wild is still a ways off, I'm incredibly excited for the sheer potential the game has. Nintendo has opened up so many opportunities for themselves with the release of Age of Calamity. Not only have they set up room for a new story in Hyrule that can go in any direction they want, they have also given themselves many different avenues of explaining different changes they make. They have a lot of material to work with, and pretty much all they have to do is implement some of the old Zelda conventions back into this new formula. They already got the big part of making an open world game right, the exploration. Now all they have to do is go back and do things that they were good at, use the strengths that they've built up over almost 35 years now. The Zelda franchise does need to change and evolve with the times. However, this change does not need to happen all at once. You don't need to break every single convention from the old formula. A lot of the things that came from the old formula is why the series is so popular today. The Zelda series doesn't need to be like Skyrim. It doesn't need to be like many of the other open world games that have come out. Zelda has a very firm identity, and it needs to stick with that. Please, Nintendo, do not lose sight of what made this franchise so beloved in the first place. Do not let the Zelda franchise just fade into obscurity because it lost its identity. I know normally you don't try to let other people's expectations influence your large creative decisions, but seeing as you're willing to break conventions in one of your most successful franchises of all time, I think it might be time that you need to break some of the old development conventions that you have. If you just take the constructive feedback that many of us have given you and take that knowledge into the development of the sequel, you will have something very special on your hands. Something that has the absolute potential to knock Ocarina of Time off of its pedestal and make Breath of the Wild 2 be the most beloved Zelda game in the entire franchise. While I and many others trust that you'll make the correct decision when it comes to developing the sequel, just know that you are in a very unique position. Breath of the Wild was the beginning of a new era for this series. It needed its change. You changed it. Now stick with it and make it better than anything we've ever seen before. All you need to do is combine the two formulas. Take what worked from both formulas and put them together. It works. The Witcher 3 proved this. I know I could come off as a little bit angry and sound like I'm basically threatening Nintendo, but I'm not trying to. As a fan of the Zelda series, I just want to see it succeed, and I just want a very good game to play, and it's up to Nintendo to make that happen. I'm just trying to tell them that they have something special on their hands, and to not let it go. The ball is in your court now, Nintendo. It's up to you to make the changes that are necessary, and I trust that you will. Here's to Breath of the Wild 2, or whatever the game's name will be, to being one of the greatest games to ever come out. I have faith in Nintendo that they'll do what they need to, and that we'll all be blown away once again by the series that we loved so dearly. So I just want to say thanks for watching this video. I know it was a long one, and it took a lot of explaining to really get down to what I wanted to talk about, but I hoped you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making this. I know in my last video I mentioned that there would be a Little Nightmares 1 and 2 video coming out next, but this topic has just been rumbling around in my head ever since I played Age of Calamity when it came out. I still plan on making a video on Little Nightmares 1 and 2, but obviously it will now be delayed until after the next Witcher Project video. Speaking of which, I'm hoping to get that video out this month as well. I'm about halfway done with that video script right now, so after this video goes live, I'll be devoting all of my attention to that video. Thank you so much again for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if there's anything in this video you agree with or disagree with, please let me know down in the comments. I'd love to read them. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy my content, and like the video if you want to. I'm not going to beg for you to like the video, just do it if you feel like it. If you want to stay up to date with what I'm doing, I have a Twitter. I don't use it very often, but I have one. I also have an Instagram. I only post there like maybe once a year, but again, I have one. I also have a Twitch channel where I'll sometimes stream the games that I'm planning on doing reviews on, so if you're interested in watching me play games live, go over and follow. Well, that's about it. Have a good one, guys. Also, please, Mr. Al Numason, don't add 900 more Korok seeds to the sequel. I can still hear their noises in my dreams.